Save login, register or subscribe to save articles for later. Normal text size, larger text size, very large text size. A man kneels in front of an advancing tank. Explosions rip apart the night sky over the golden domes of Kiev. Families scramble to board trains as others shelter in underground stations with their blankets and pets. A president refuses to leave his city. These are images of war on a scale not seen in Europe since World War II, and all in the past 7 days. But, while Russia's military outguns Ukraine's, the invasion is not unfolding as most expected. Ukraine's fierce resistance so far has bought it time, says Dr. Bobo Lowe, a former Australian diplomat to Moscow. They and their president have really shamed the West into acting more than they would have if Ukraine had folded quickly. Still, Russia's forces are changing tactics too, unleashing ever more live weapons as they continue their pincer move into Ukraine from the north, east and south. Here's what you need to know about the first week of the invasion. Sviatoslav, 6, plays with his tablet in a public basement used as a bomb shelter in Kiev on February 24th. Emilio Morinati, AP Day 1, Russia attacks. It started just before dawn. On February 24th, as UN officials were publicly urging Russia back from the brink of war, President Vladimir Putin announced an all-out attack on Ukraine. Within minutes, missiles and rockets rained down on its cities, including the capital Kiev, the second-largest city Kharkiv, and Odessa in the south. Putin said the special military operation was to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, part of the Kremlin's fiction that Ukraine has been carrying out a genocide in the east against Russian speakers, and that the democratically elected Ukrainian government, run by the Jewish Volodymyr Zelenki, is a fascist regime. Putin warned the West of historic consequences if they interfered. Earlier, President Zelenki had made a plea directly to Russian citizens, saying Ukrainians wanted peace. But if they were attacked by Russian troops, you will see our faces, not our backs, but our faces. Russian troops spilled over the northeastern border, landed on the southern coast from the Black Sea and Crimea, which Putin had seized in 2014, and started to push deeper into the east, where Russian-backed separatists have been fighting a long simmering war for territory with Ukrainian soldiers. From the border with Kremlin ally Belarus, more Russian soldiers advanced and missiles fell. That night, Russians seized the Chernobyl nuclear power plant that had been the site of the disastrous 1986 meltdown, taking its staff hostage and raising concerns from international monitors. In the Black Sea, Ukrainian border guards defending Zminy, known as Snake Island, told a Russian warship calling on them to surrender to "go F yourself." Though US intelligence had warned of Kremlin plans for an all-out invasion of Ukraine, the scale of the attack shocked most observers. Deep down, I thought the worst-case scenario was a bluff, says Ukrainian expert Professor Marko Pavlyushin. Germany's spy chief was reportedly caught unawares in Kiev and had to be extracted in a special operation. Ukrainians too, having lived with war looming since 2014, scrambled to flee west or take shelter. Russia justified its attack at an emergency session of the UN Security Council as self-defense, but was condemned by world leaders and diplomats, including from Africa, although not China, which has been drawing closer to Russia in recent years. While NATO countries had ruled out sending troops to Ukraine, as it is not part of the military alliance, they further ramped up troops in nearby member countries. In Ukraine, Zelensky declared martial law, banning men aged 18 to 60 from leaving the country, as civilian militias swelled and more weapons landed from the west. Even on day one, there were stories of Russian soldiers surrendering, having not realized they were invading Ukraine. Many expected to be welcomed as liberators by the Ukrainian people, Pavlyushin says. That's not happening. Day 2, fighting reaches Kiev streets. The fighting was still raging and the world reeling when dawn came again. Protests against the war had erupted around the globe, including in Russia, where more than 1,000 people were arrested. Ukrainian forces said they had recaptured a key airfield near Kiev as invaders advanced on the capital. Kiev, a 1,500-year-old metropolis home to more than 3 million people, is a key prize for Putin as the birthplace of both Ukrainian and Russian cultures, and the seat of the Ukrainian government he wants to overthrow. A man carries a sleeping child across the Polish border from Ukraine on February 25. Western countries impose tougher sanctions on Russia's economy and ruling elite. Some, including Australia, extended financial freezes to Belarus too, and the US introduced Russia-wide bans on many of its sensitive technologies. But it did not answer Ukraine's call to lock Russia out of the SWIFT payment system, which connects the world's banks, citing concerns it would hurt European economies. Zelensky said more than 100 people were in the first day of the invasion. He called them heroes and hit out at Russia's claim that it was targeting only military assets. They are turning peaceful cities into military targets, he said, adding that Russian sabotage groups had entered Kiev hunting for political leaders, with Zelensky himself the #1 target. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has posted social media updates from Kiev to refute fake news the government has fled the capital. But despite fake Russian reports that he had fled the city, he refused US offers to evacuate him from Ukraine. "I don't need a ride, I need ammunition," he said. On the second night of the invasion, as Kiev came under further attack and Putin called on the Ukrainian military to stage a coup, Zelensky warned that the fate of Ukraine was now being decided. Many sought refuge in train stations deep underground, as more explosions, and sometimes gunfire rang out in the streets overhead. Newlyweds Ari Eva and Fersin joined their country's defense efforts on the second day of Russia's invasion. Day 3, Ukrainians pushed back. By the morning of February 26, Ukrainian authorities said they had pushed back invaders near Kiev. But the bombardment of Ukrainian cities and towns continued, hitting schools, hospitals and residential buildings, and many Ukrainians still face the agonizing choice to fight or flee. Traffic jams and chaotic scenes at train stations played out around the country as people fled to countries such as Poland, Moldova and Romania, many of them women and children leaving behind male loved ones. Meanwhile, in the growing bands of civilian militias marching the streets, grenades and homemade Molotov cocktails were being handed out. Hackers around the world were called to the defense of Ukraine's critical infrastructure and began launching counterstrikes on Russian government websites. Footage emerged of Russian forces running out of petrol and supplies, including this video of a Ukrainian jokingly offering a tow back to Russia. British officials said the Ukrainian resistance had been extraordinary so far considering the firepower they were up against, with missiles provided by the West helping them take out Russian aircraft and whole columns of tanks. As Putin reportedly told China's President Xi Jinping that he was willing to begin negotiations with Ukraine, Western countries including Australia imposed rare personal sanctions on Putin. Lowe says it was Zelensky, the TV comedian turned extraordinary wartime leader, who moved European leaders from near indifference, frankly, to serious action on Russia. A penny had finally dropped. Later, Russia used its veto power at the UN Security Council to quash a draft resolution calling on Moscow to halt the invasion. China abstained from the vote. Kiev passed a third night of war under curfew as Ukrainian forces searched for Russian mercenaries in the city's streets.